Hello again, everybody. This is Mr. Everything coming at you with another wargaming and miniature video. In this video, we're continuing on with our Warlords of Erehwon boot camp. In this episode, we're going to be talking about weapons and armor, chariots, and monstrosity. Now, weapons and armor. Models have a resist stat that allows you to save versus any damage that might have befallen you. Now, most human-sized creatures wear armor or carry shields. They can increase their resist value by 1, 2, and in some cases 3. And armor is shown in the stat line as the number in parentheses. So you might have a 5 resist, but if you get +2 for armor, then your resist would be 7. Now, both values are shown because some weapons bypass armor. For example, the best armor in the world won't save a wearer from a gaseous breath attack. Now, in most cases, a unit of troops has the same stats for all of its members apart from its leader. A leader can have a better stat, and they always have the tough special rule. If a leader has better armor, any hits allocated to the leader will test against the higher resist value. Light armor, +1. A model in light armor, if it carries a shield or wears some kind of metal or leather armor covering its chest or torso. It might have a helmet, some greaves. In some cases, troops with shields and body armor may be treated as lightly armored if they are armed with weapons that need both hands to use, because they can't use their shield. A model is medium armor if it carries a shield and wears metal armor covering its chest or torso, or if it wears armor covering practically everything. As before, some troops wearing all enclosed armor and carrying shields might be treated as medium if they're armed with weapons that require 2 hands. Heavy armor. A model has heavy armor if it wears armor from head to toe, regardless of whether it carries a shield. Essentially, we're talking about the heavily armored knights clanking about on the battlefield with thick metal armor. Heavy armor usually comes with the heavily laden special rule that makes it impossible to sprint, sometimes imposing a penalty to agility or initiative. Spangly armor, +3 resistance. Spangly is equivalent to heavy armor, but with none of the penalty. It's specialty of elves, expressly and rather spangly. Some dwarves, at any rate, point out that the elves are just too weedy and feeble to bear the weight of heavy armor. Others, including many elves, maintain that only an idiot would prefer to lug around the burdensome weight of heavy armor. But either way, it gives them +3 resistance. Mounts, 0, 1, 2. Mounted models get an additional resistance if their steed is tough or in their own right compared to its rider, and if it also is protected by armor, such as barding or some comparison. Not all mounted units get this bonus. Okay, so that's your resist roll. And resist is what you roll less than to save versus casualty. Okay, let's talk about ranged weapons, like bows, crossbows, handguns, thrown missiles, rocks, javelins, anything that shoots. The SV of a ranged weapon, or its strike value, is deducted from the target's resist value when making your resist test. So your strike value, or SV, is kind of like an armor save minus. Some of them have special rules, like can also be used in hand-to-hand, like the thrown rock. Basically, you can bash somebody in the head with a rock. Fire attack indicates a flaming or fiery attack, which would cause it an extra pin if it's hit. Fire order to shoot. Basically, you can't move and shoot with it. Heavily laden. This special rule applies to weapons that are heavy or burdensome. You can't sprint with them. Overhead. Basically, it's like a rock lobber. It shoots it over buildings and over walls and over your friendly and enemy troops. Unstoppable. A weapon with unstoppable shot can potentially hit several units at once. The shot penetrating the first unit and hitting another unit behind it. If the shooter hits the first target, work out that it hits as normal, then this shooter can target a unit behind the first, drawing a line of fire through any portion of the first unit's formation to strike a more distant unit. And you stop rolling once you run out of range or run out of target. 2 times ranged attack. Instead of making just 1 shot, the shooter gets 2 shots, or 3 shots, or whatever the range number is. ×2 ranged attacks on fire order. If the unit gets 2 shots with a fire order, either as an action or reaction. Otherwise, he only gets 1 shot. So like if a fire order, you're standing there and shooting, but if you're moving and shooting, you wouldn't get that ability. D6 range attacks. It makes a random number of attacks when shooting as indicated by the die roll. D6, D4 hits. The number of hits scored by an overhead weapon that strikes a target or by a cannon. So that's how many hits you get. If you only roll once to hit, but once you hit, you actually hit more than one person. It's like a blast radius. Then we go to hand weapons. Hand-to-hand weapons, a little bit different. They're carried weapons, spears, maces, axes, swords, things like that. Teeth, claws, horns, whatever. It also has a strike value, which also reduces your resist tests. And the special rules are armor +1 maximum. So the enemy's armor bonus is reduced to +1 because it's a bigger weapon or whatever, or it has penetration. Can also be thrown during an exchange of missiles. Can also be thrown as a ranged weapon. That applies to like rocks that you can use as a hand-to-hand weapon. Cancels charge bonus. Like I guess that's a bill or a pitchfork. It applies to long spears or other polearms that present the enemy with a hedge of spear points, canceling out any impetus gained by charging. Heavily laden. A unit armed with heavily laden get the heavily laden rule, which means they can't sprint. Strength +1. The halberd, the axe, sword, or mace, the staff or quarterstaff. Okay. These handy weapons are ideal for cut and thrust combat. Models armed with these weapons add a bonus to their strength, making it more likely fighters will land a blow. SV3 on charge. This applies to the lance and indicates the weapon is a different strike value when it charges. It has a normal strike value of 1, but 3 when it charges. And only that first round of... And that's your weapons and armor. Now let's move on to chariots. Unfortunately, I don't own any chariots. I don't possess a chariot model of any kind. Not even for my Hail Caesar models. But I'll talk about them because we're doing the tutorial. Chariots require few special rules to take account crew and draft creatures. Each can potentially make attacks, and they can also suffer damage when the chariot is hit. It has a composite stat line. So basically it has the chariot and the draft horses on one line. The crew, take it back. It has the chariot on one line, the crew on another line, and the war horses on another line. The chariot itself does not fight as such, but any special rules or bonuses listed against it apply to the crew and the draft animals. So in the example, which is a chariot, because any special rules that's listed under the chariot applies to both the crew and the warhorse. So they have large, fast, irresistible charge. So the crew would also have the irresistible charge, and so would the warhorses. Now draft animals don't normally have attack values except where specially indicated. If it does have a hand-to-hand attack, it will be listed under the special rules. And warhorses do have a hand-to-hand strike value 1. Scythes. Some chariots are equipped and fitted with side wheels. What that means is they have blades sticking out, like in Ben-Hur, from their chariot wheels. The scythes cause D6 hits with a strike value of 1. If the chariot has an irresistible charge rule, the additional bonus is added to the strike value. So it already has a 1, and then it would add another D3. And we'll get into special rules. Damage on chariots. Hits on chariot models are resolved against the chariot's resistance value, usually 10, and can shrug off many great hits upon them with relative ease. However, they are brittle and vulnerable to missile attacks. It only takes one failed roll, and a chariot can be badly damaged or even destroyed. So be warned. If the chariot's resistance value test is failed, it is necessary to make a further roll on the chariot damage chart. The chariot doesn't automatically fall casualty because it fails a resist test. It risks falling casualty when the damage chart roll is made. Resistance rerolls. In the case of chariots, resistance fails can never be re-rolled. If the model would normally be allowed to re-roll, it doesn't re-roll the resist roll, it re-rolls the damage chart roll. The re-rolled result stands regardless of whether it is better or worse. Now the crew members are entitled to resist re-rolls, because like a chariot rider might have the tough special rule. Remember that 1s and 10s still apply. If the chariot fails 2 or more resist tests at the same time, it is necessary to make multiple rolls on the damage chart. Add pins indicated to any chariot. Chariots take a pin for being hit and for every damage chart roll. And if a chariot has as many pins as its command value, it's automatically destroyed, as normal. Okay, let's take kind of a quick look at the chariot damage chart. I don't have it in front of you, but basically 1 is it'll polish out. The chariot's sturdy bodywork has taken a brunt of the damage, leaving the crew and draft creatures undaunted. Just take a pin. But on 2 it says that was close. The crew and draft animals barely managed to avoid being struck, but take a D3 pins. So even though you failed the resist roll, you're still taking almost no damage. 3, mere flesh wound. 1 plus D3 pins and go down. 4, draft animals struck. 1 or both draft animals are badly hurt. Take 1 plus D3 pins and go down and move reduced to 1M. Okay, that doesn't mean 1 inch. That's 1 movement value. You can't sprint or run. So if their movement value is 5, they'll move 5. Crew struck. 1 crew member is badly hurt and the fight rages all around. Take 1 plus D3 pins and go down. The crew member is incapacitated. Smash. This is 6 to 7. This is the majority of the rolls. Well, 6 and 7. Smash. The chariot is partially smashed under the weight of the ferocious attack. Take 1 plus D6 pins. Take a break test. If damaged during hand-to-hand fighting, take the break test after combat results are worked out. Just like normal, right? Just as if you had lost the combat. Remember, you don't double up on break tests. And 8 and better, destroyed. So that's 8, 9, and 10. You would be destroyed. The crew is slain, rendered incapable of further fighting. The draft animals are dead or fleeing to safety. Remove the chariot as a casualty. Now, special. If the chariot's ridden by a warlord or other model with a wound special rule, the model is not slain, but is incapacitated instead and can continue to fight on foot as described for incapacitated crew. Okay, crew member incapacitated. One of the crew is either killed or badly hurt and no longer able to fight on. The crew member cannot make ranged or hand-to-hand attacks or use any equipment or special rules. If models can be removed, it's a good idea to remove him. If not, place a counter on him. Once all chariot crew members are incapacitated, the chariot automatically is destroyed. Heroes, wizards, and warlords. If a chariot contains a hero, wizard, or warlord, or other model with a wound special rule, he's always incapacitated last. If a heroic individual is incapacitated, or if their chariot is destroyed, instead of him falling casualty, the chariot model is removed, and the heroic individual can continue to fight on foot as a warrior unit with 1 wound and 1 pin. The unit is not therefore destroyed, but is instead converted to a wounded hero. Any spells or other considerations applying to the unit still apply. Any order die he already has remains in play. Any additional pins on the unit are removed along with the chariot, leaving just 1 pin. The heroic character emerges defiantly from the wreckage of the chariot, ready to continue the fight. Alright, and the last chapter today is called Monstrosities. A unit we call Monstrosities is a huge variety of very large monsters. I don't know, something like maybe a giant, or maybe a dragon. These guys would be considered monstrosities. But not just that. I mean, you could have the T-Rex. It might be a monstrosity. And believe it or not, things like... yeah, even things like an elephant might be considered a monstrosity. And the monstrosity might have like... what am I doing? Might have a crew member or 2. Could be a giant spider, giant scorpion. Basically any large monster, as well as machines. The thing that makes monstrosities different from all other units, including chariots, is that they have 2 or 3 order dice rather than 1. Because monstrosities have more than 1 order die, they can take more than 1 action in a turn. This means, for example, a monstrosity unit could be given a run order with its first die and take 2 moves, and subsequently be given an advanced order with its second die, move 1 move, and make a range attack. Okay, now most monstrosities have a standard stat line because they're a single creature. For example, a mammoth, or a dragon, or a manticore, or a wyvern. Now those same creatures might have riders, in some cases such as a mammoth, like this elephant. You could throw a rider on the back, and then it would have a second stat line, like barbarian with crew or something, or with spear. Now in the special column, it'll tell us like how many order dice the unit has, in case like the mammoth has 2. Alright, now in the special column chart, it'll actually tell you if it has multiple order dice. It's called the MOD rule. And if it has a 2, then it has 2 dice. If it has a 3, it has 3 dice. And theoretically, you can have more than 3 dice, but the game limits the monstrosities that they've printed to only having 3. It just depends. Now some riders and crews are listed separately because they might have their own wounds. They might be a hero or a champion. And just like a chariot, when it's destroyed, they're not destroyed. They're just 1 pin, 1 wound on the ground. Now damage is worked out a lot like chariots in that when you do damage to a monstrosity, then you roll on the monstrosity chart, monstrosity damage chart, just like you would on a chariot. And the monstrosity damage chart goes 1 to 10, 1 being 'tis but a scratch, 1 pin. 2 and 3 is it takes more than that. That's 1 plus D3 pins. 4 to 6 is light damage. It's a 1 die, D3 pins, and go down. And then it's considered injured. Its resist value is reduced by a D3, so you're actually weakening it. Cripple. A 7 is a cripple. Monstrosity is badly crippled. It takes 1 plus D3 pins. It goes down. It loses 1 of its order dice. Move is also reduced to 1. 1M, that is. And it's also, resist value is reduced by a D6. Now these reductions are to a minimum of 5. So this mammoth starts with a resist of 12, and so you reduce it by a d6. Let's say I roll a 6, it still has a resist of 6, making it easier to damage in the future. 8 is crush. The monstrosity is crushed under the weight of the ferocious attack. 1 plus d3 pins, goes down, loses 1 order die. D3 crew members are incapacitated, removed to 1M, and its resist value is reduced by a d6 to a minimum of 5. So crush and cripple are very similar. It's a crush actually loses an extra crew members. Okay, 9, mangle. Is mangled horribly, crippled, crushed, and surely the end is in sight. Take 1 plus d6 pins, go down, lose an order die. D3 crew members are incapacitated. Move reduced to 1M. It's injured, so its resist value is reduced by a d6. Must take a break test. If it's damaged during hand-to-hand fighting, take the break test after the fighting is worked out. And lastly, 10. Destroyed. The monstrosity is no more. All the monstrosity topples and collapses to the ground. Units within its shadow risk being crushed by the monstrous bulk. Roll a d6. All units, friends or foes, within that number of inches are struck by debris, falling limbs, writhing entrails, or whatever. Each unit suffers d6 ranged hits at a strike value of 3. So that reduces their resistance by 3. Work these out as regular shooting hits and give the unit a pin as if it had been shot. So, like this guy, you hit him, he dies, you roll a d6, right? Anybody within 6 inches, that's this guy and this guy, and does damage to him. That's pretty awesome. Okay, now if your monstrosity is struck by an unstoppable missile, chiefly a cannonball or a large bolt thrower, instead of rolling once on the damage chart for each failed resist test, you must roll twice and apply both results. If you're entitled to a reroll, then each result is considered a separate resist fail. In other words, if you have the tough rule, you can reroll one result. If tough 2, 2 results. If the monstrosity has been hit by shooting and is making a damage roll as a result of failing a resist test, then it suffers a pin from the hit as normal and will always take at least 1 extra pin for each damage roll it is obliged to make. In hand-to-hand fighting, any pins that accumulates go towards deciding the result of the combat in the usual way. And if the monstrosity has as many pins as its command value, it is broken and destroyed down. If the monstrosity has not yet received all of its order dice this turn, take an order die from the bag and give it to the unit, a down order. If the monstrosity has already been given all of its orders, turn the current order to show down. If the monstrosity's current order die is already down, turn its next most recent order to down, and so on. If all the monstrosity's order dice are already down, then there's no further effect. Lose 1 MOD. This only applies to a monstrosity that has more than 1 order die. If a monstrosity has already lost MOD dice so that it's down to 1, then it doesn't apply. A monstrosity can never have lost its last die. It's reduced to a minimum of 1. If the monstrosity has 1 or more unplayed order die in the die bag, remove 1 of these. If all the dice have already been played, then remove 1 that's been played. No matter how badly injured, a monstrosity's resist value can never drop below 5. After applying all damage results, take a break test. Only ever take 1 break test, even if you're instructed to take 2. Monstrosity is destroyed together with any crew and the unit remains as casualties. However, if the monstrosity is ridden by a warlord, then he falls off, incapacitated, 1 wound, just like any others. Okay, monstrosity dice, or order dice. Monstrosities have 2 or sometimes 3 order dice. Each turn a monstrosity unit can be given a number of orders equal to its die value. When a new order is issued, it becomes the unit's current action and previous orders are ignored. Work out the unit's action each time it receives an order as if you would with any other unit. At the turn end phase, make recovery tests for dice that are down as you would for other units, removing pins where appropriate. Return order dice to the die bag, leaving any remaining down orders, ambushes, or run orders as you would for any other unit. The most recent issued retained order carries over to the next turn as the current order. Giving an order. When a die is drawn from the die bag, the player can use it to activate the monstrosity that has not yet used all of its order dice. Orders are issued and order tests are taken exactly the same way as with a unit. Removal of pins. Pins are removed when orders are issued in the same way for other units. This enables a monstrosity to lose more pins each turn than would ordinarily be done, because if it has 3 order dice and it passes 3 order tests, it'll lose 3 pins. Down orders, something a little special. If a monstrosity takes a down action, either deliberately or as a result of failing an order test, this doesn't stop it receiving further orders that turn if it is entitled to them. For example, a monstrosity might fail its order test and go down with its first order, but pass its order test and advance with its second. Both the down and advanced order die would be left in place, with advanced being the current order. If the monstrosity unit has down order at the turn end, test for each to see if it is recovered. Roll a d10 for each down order and apply the same modifier, -1 per pin, etc. Return successfully recovered order die to the die bag, and then remove pins from the unit as per the recovery results. If any recovery tests are failed, leave those dice in place and carry the down orders into the next turn as you would for any other unit. If a monstrosity begins a turn with a down order as its current action, it is down until it receives a further order and makes a different action. So basically it just robs the monstrosity of one action per turn per down. So like if this guy has an advance, a fire, and a down, and I roll to recover the down, it doesn't come off, but these two do go back into the bag. If I had a 3 down, let's say, and I rolled and I recovered just one of them, it goes in the bag, and 2 of these dice stay. But when it comes time to act and I pull a die out, I can still have this guy move, even though he's down. And his move would be the most current action, and the downs are just carried on, just dragged along with him. If you give a monstrosity an ambush order, this applies in the usual way until further orders are given. The ambush ceases to apply as soon as a different order is given. If a monstrosity has pins and a current ambush order, it can be given a subsequent ambush order without making an order test. Basically, it enables the unit to stay on ambush without obliging it to make an order test. But also this means that no pin is removed. If an ambush is successfully sprung, the unit's current action changes to match the chosen reaction, same as everyone else. At the turn end phase, any ambush orders the unit has can be returned to the die bag, except that a single current ambush order can be retained if the player wishes. If the unit has 1 or more down orders, it is acceptable to make the recovery test first before deciding whether to retain the ambush order. Bear in mind that because the current order is the one that counts, it is obviously pointless to retain an ambush order if it is not the current order once recovery tests have been made. Okay, fast monstrosities and run orders. A monstrosity with a fast special rule can also retain a run order in the same way as other fast units. It applies to creatures and machines that fly as well. As with ambush orders, a run order can only be retained if it is the current order once any other dice have been returned to the die bag. As with retained ambush orders, it is acceptable to make recovery tests for down order dice, deciding whether to retain the run order or not. Alright, so monstrosities, it seems like, will have an incredible amount of power, especially if they have like 3 order dice. They'd be treated like 3 units because they'll get to move and attack and move and shoot and move twice or whatever they need to do 3 times around. Where if you have 1 orc unit against, even if it's big, against 1 dragon, let's say, that has 3, he's only going to get 1 die per turn, and he's going to get 3 dice per turn. It's like having 3 dragons. So you would need that's why they were so expensive point-wise. Alright guys, well thanks for coming out and checking out this video. We'll go on to the special rules and spells and wizardry. Alright, I'll see you then.